Welcome everyone. My name is Leo Baret and I work in product marketing at CODESYS. Over the next 30 minutes, I want to give you a clear picture of CODESYS 4, what it is, why we are building it, and how it relates to CODESYS 3 you already know. Right at the start, CODESYS 4 is not a replacement. It is a second tool built for requirements that CODESYS 3 was never designed to address. Let me begin with where things stand today. You can see 6 topics on screen. We start with CODESYS 3 as it stands today, then look at why a second tool became necessary. From there, we move into the architecture, our development principles and release model, the scope of the first version, and finally, when to use which tool. Let us start with the foundation. I want to start with the single most important message of this entire webinar. The CODESYS 3 development system will continue to be developed and maintained for the foreseeable future. More than 300,000 users around the world depend on CODESYS 3 every day. The system carries over 20 years of maturity and more than 1,000 person-years of engineering effort. It is proven, it is stable, and it covers the needs of the vast majority of automation projects. So when we talk about CODESYS 4 today, please understand it as a complement, a second tool for scenarios that CODESYS 3 was not built to handle. CODESYS 3 continues to receive active development and support. That naturally raises the question, if CODESYS 3 is this capable, why build something else? There are 4 concrete drivers behind CODESYS 4, and I want to walk through each one. The first is platform dependency. CODESYS 3 runs exclusively on Windows. If you need Linux, you need a virtual machine. We evaluated porting CODESYS 3 to other platforms, and without a fundamental architectural change, it is simply not viable. The second driver is the convergence of IT and OT. Git, CI/CD pipelines, and DevOps practices are arriving in automation. At the same time, soft PLCs and virtual controllers are increasingly running on Linux. But the development tool only runs on Windows. That gap is becoming harder to ignore. Third, team development. Many automation projects are maintained over years by mid-sized or large teams who need proper collaboration tools. Version control, branching, code review. And fourth, customer demand. We have been hearing requests for platform-independent development for years. With that motivation in mind, let me show you 3 design decisions that shaped everything in CODESYS 4. Before I show you the architecture, I want you to understand 3 decisions that come before everything else. If you keep these in mind, the technical details will make sense. The first decision: separate backend and front-end. The backend handles compilation, project management, and device communication. It is platform independent. It runs on Windows, Linux, or potentially on the PLC itself. The front end is a browser application, so you can open it on any device with a modern browser. The second decision: projects as folders of text files, not a single binary file like .project we have in CODESYS 3. This is what unlocks version control, branching, merging, and code review in external tools. The third decision: full compatibility with the CODESYS 3 runtime and libraries. Many of you remember the transition from CODESYS 2 to CODESYS 3, where a lot changed at once. We have deliberately chosen not to repeat that. These are the anchor points. Now let me take you through the architecture in more detail. On this slide, you can see 6 pillars that form the foundation of CODESYS 4. Let me put them in context. The back-end front-end separation has an important consequence. The front-end is entirely optional for core operations. You can compile and build without ever opening a browser. That is what makes headless CI/CD possible. Text-based storage means your project lives as human-readable files, JSON, XML, and native text like structured text. Nothing is locked inside a proprietary binary. The shared runtime is the one you already know from CODESYS 3. Your existing hardware, your certifications, all of that carries over. Security is built in from the ground up. Modern authentication, rate limiting, and process isolation are designed from day one. The CODESYS library concept is fully adopted, with semantic versioning and log files added on top for explicit, reproducible dependencies. And finally, the extension model prepares for a future plugin ecosystem. Internally, we already use it for Modbus, Ladder, and structured text editor. Next, I will show you how these layers are structured technically. This diagram shows 3 layers. The back end does the work, the front end shows the result, and a defined channel connects them. The back end is built on .NET 8 LTS. It handles compilation, project management, and PLC communication through the CODESYS gateway. It runs natively on both Windows and Linux. The communication channel between back-end and front-end uses WebSocket with JSON RPC 2.0. It supports request response, observable streams, and automatic reconnection for a stable connection between back-end and front-end. If you are familiar with modern web development, these patterns will feel natural. The front-end is an application using the Monaco editor, the same engine behind Visual Studio Code. Project tree, watch lists, and code editors all run in the browser. This layered architecture opens up multiple deployment options. Let me show you the 4 scenarios. Because back-end and front-end are separate, the same software can be deployed on 4 different ways. First, locally on the developer's machine. Back-end and browser on one PC. Familiar, quick to set up, and available in the first release as a Windows desktop application. Second, on a central company server. The backend runs on Linux, team members connect through their browsers, everyone works on the same version with the shared user management. If you have ever struggled with different versions across the team with CODESYS 3, this scenario addresses that directly. Third, directly on the controller. You connect a tablet to a powerful PLC, open the browser, enter the IP address, and you are in the development environment. I want to be transparent. This is an architectural capability we are designing for, but it is not part of the first release. And fourth, backend only in a CI/CD pipeline. The compiler runs headless for automated builds and testing, no user interface needed. What makes all of these scenarios possible is a fundamental change in how projects are stored. In CODESYS 4, a project is not a single binary file. It is a directory on the file system. Library projects, device projects, and workspaces each have their own structure. Dependencies are declared in a JSON file and resolved into a log file with checksums. If you have worked with npm or NuGet, you will recognize this pattern immediately. Semantic versioning with pre-release labels is supported, so you can distinguish between stable releases, release candidates, and development builds. To practical consequence, because everything is stored as text, you get proper diff, merge, code review, and branching. The same Git workflows that software teams in the IT world have relied on for years. No proprietary binary, no login to a specific tool. This brings me to a closely related topic: compatibility between CODESYS 4 and CODESYS 3. This slide addresses the biggest concern in the room. What happens to my existing investment? CODESYS 4 and CODESYS 3 share the exact same runtime. No new target hardware, no new runtime certification, no parallel operation. Code compiled in CODESYS 4 runs on any controller that already runs CODESYS 3 code. For libraries, the compatibility goes both ways. One requirement to be upfront about: CODESYS 4 only supports runtimes from Service Pack 18 onward, the versions that include user management. We deliberately chose not to re-implement the older insecure protocols for runtimes before Service Pack 18. If we have been wondering about investment protection, this compatibility is the answer. Now let me show you what the two tools share under the hood. You can see 4 shared building blocks on the screen, and these are not just compatible, they are jointly developed. The IEC editor Ladder shares a common technical core. The compiler produces identical machine code regardless of which tool you use. The library concept carries over fully, and compiled libraries move freely between both tools in both directions. And the runtime on the PLC is exactly the same. In practice, every library you have built in CODESYS 3 remains fully usable. Your engineering knowledge and your tested code carry forward. Beyond the shared technology, CODESYS 4 also introduced security as a core architectural principle. Security was a design requirement from day one, not something we added later in response to an audit or a regulation. In the server deployment, CODESYS 4 runs as a separate operating system process for every user session. That means if one session crashes, no other user is affected. Modern encryption is used throughout, and authentication mechanisms including XSRF token protection are built into the communication between front-end and back-end. This matters especially in light of new regulations. The Cyber Resilience Act and the updated machinery regulation are raising the bar for what manufacturers need to demonstrate in terms of security. Automated build and test processes, which CODESYS 4 is designed to support, help you produce the compliance evidence these regulations require. If your organization is already preparing for these standards, having a reproducible, auditable build pipeline is a significant advantage. With that, let me turn to the development philosophy behind CODESYS 4. You can see our guiding principle on screen. And I want to read it out because it explains a lot about why the first release looks the way it does. Quality and long-term viability of the architecture take absolute priority over a complete feature set. We made a conscious decision not to repeat the experience of the CODESYS 2 to CODESYS 3 transition, where a great deal had to change at once. Instead, we invested heavily in getting the foundations right: the compiler, the editor integration, the file-based storage and client-server architecture, as well as the extension model. That foundation is now solid and thoroughly tested. Going forward, we will build features on top of it at a steady pace. And that is exactly what the agile release model is designed to deliver. This leads me directly to a principle that many of you will care about deeply. IEC 61131.3 remains the programming standard in CODESYS 4. Your expertise is fully preserved. Some approaches in the market try to move PLC programming entirely into text-based IT toolchains. We have taken a different path. IT methods like version control and CI/CD are made accessible for automation engineers without asking you to leave the tools and languages you know. That is why the letter editor is included in the first release, a deliberate signal that graphical programming languages belong to PLC development, even as workflows modernize. IEC 61131.3 remains the foundation. Modern capabilities are layered on top. Over 20 years ago, we added object orientation to CODESYS. Available, but never mandatory. The same principle applies here. How do we make sure new features reach you quickly? Through an agile release model. We plan to release a new version of CODESYS 4 approximately every 2 months. There are no separate patches, bug fixes and new features shipped together in the next version. This approach keeps our development moving quickly because we avoid the overhead of maintaining parallel branches. Our roadmap for roughly the next 18 months is publicly available. Beyond that, long-term goals are shared in the customer portal. On your feedback plays a direct role in how we prioritize. The backlog is shaped by what early adopters tell us matters the most. I also want to set expectations here. Firm delivery dates for individual features are only realistic in the short term. That is not a limitation, it is how agile development works. We commit to the cadence and each release delivers the highest priority items from the backlog. What this means for you? If a feature matters to you, let us know. Early adopter feedback directly affects what goes into the next version. With that, let me show you what the first release specifically contains. The first release comes in 4 variants. C4 Desktop Win is a Windows desktop application for single-user development. It runs a local backend and an embedded browser, the same pattern behind VS Code or Slack. C4 Server is a multi-user server for Linux, available as a Debian package. This is the team variant, with user management, multi-user sessions and process isolation. C4 is the command line interface for CI/CD pipelines. Compile, build and validate projects with a JSON output option for machine-readable results. And C4 PKM is a package manager for extensions and profiles. All 4 share the same .NET 8 core. The experience is consistent regardless of which variant you use. The natural follow-up question is, which PLCs can I target? Hardware support is one of the most common questions, so let me be specific. You can target Raspberry Pi controllers in multiple variants. Windows soft PLCs are supported. Control Win and Control RTE, 32 and 64-bit. Linux controllers on x86, ARM and ARM64 are covered, and virtual controllers are available. One important clarification: in the first release, only CODESYS native runtimes are supported. Third-party hardware and fieldbus protocols, like EtherCAT or Profinet, will follow in later releases. These controllers cover the key scenarios: library development, testing on Raspberry Pi or virtual controllers, and small applications with a few I/Os via Modbus. Let me show you the primary use case for this first release: library development. Library development is the primary use case for the first release, and here is why. Think of a PLC software engineer who works primarily in structured text. Someone who writes ST code daily, maintains library versions, and documents interfaces. Today, CODESYS 3 reaches its limits for library workflows: no native CI/CD, manual versioning, implicit dependencies. CODESYS 4 addresses all of them. You get command line builds, log file dependencies, semantic versioning with pre-release labels, and a modern editor. You can build, version, and publish libraries automatically in a pipeline. Set it up once, and every commit follows the same process. Let me walk you through what that pipeline looks like. The workflow has 3 steps, and once set up, it runs the same way every time. First, you develop your ST library in CODESYS 4 or CODESYS 3 and commit the code to the Git repository. Second, the pipeline takes over. The compiler runs headless and produces a compiled library with a checksum and validates the log file for dependency consistency. Third, you deliver. The compiled library can go into a CODESYS 3 project or a CODESYS 4 project. Because both share the same runtime and library format, the output is immediately usable in either. That is the core value. Every commit follows the same defined path with reproducible results. In webinar 2, we will demonstrate this live. The CLI commands, version management options, and full GitLab pipeline integration. Now let me summarize what is included in the first release and what comes later. I want to be transparent about scope. Setting the right expectations matters. On the left, what is included? Targeting September 2026. The structured text editor with syntax highlighting, autocomplete and hover. Ladder diagram 0.1 with basics functions. The compiler with full CLI access. Library management with log files and semantic versioning, a basic Modbus configurator, inline monitoring for structured text, and light and dark themes in English and German. On the right, what is not included: graphical editors for CFC, FBD, and SFC, breakpoints, stepping and variable forcing, online change and ladder monitoring, the test manager and library documentation generation, visualization, motion, and OPC UA, external partner extensions, and a marketplace. You will notice that the right column contains what you need for classic commissioning. That is intentional. The first release focuses on library development and CI/CD, and for those use cases, it is production ready. Now let me address timing and cost. Let me give you clear answers on timing and cost. The first release ships in September 2026. I wanted to emphasize this is not a beta or a technology preview. It is a production-ready release for library development and CI/CD workflows and basic application development. Starting in fall 2026, new versions will follow approximately every 2 months. As I mentioned earlier, there are no separate patches. Each new version includes both fixes and new features. Through the end of 2028, CODESYS 4 is free of charge. From 2029 at the earliest, a paid licensing model will apply, most likely as part of the Professional Developer Edition, which already targets library development and CI/CD integration for teams. So if you are considering when to get started, there is no financial barrier for the foreseeable future. And those who adopt early have a direct opportunity to influence our development priorities. Your feedback shapes what we build next, and the earlier you are involved, the more impact you have. That brings us to the final topic. When should I use CODESYS 3 and when should I use CODESYS 4? This slide I would encourage you to bookmark because it answers the most common question. CODESYS 3 remains the right tool for classic commissioning, complex projects with the full feature set, visualization, motion and field buses, and proven workflows with the test manager and debugger. CODESYS 4 is the better choice for platform-independent development on Linux or ARM, CI/CD pipelines with headless builds, team collaboration on a central server, and library development in structured text. It also works well for small applications, for example Modbus on a Raspberry Pi. A conversion tool is planned to help move projects between the two versions, CODESYS 3 and CODESYS 4. For most structures, it will work smoothly. Complex configurations and projects may have limitations. Let me close with the single most important takeaway. If you take away one thing from today, let it be this. CODESYS 4 is a complement to CODESYS 3, not a replacement. The two tools share the same runtime, the same compiler core, and the same library concept. If you are productive with CODESYS 3 today, you lose nothing. And if you want to bring modern IT development practices, version control, automated builds, team collaboration into your automation work, CODESYS 4 gives you a dedicated tool for that. Let me give you a brief preview of what is coming in Webinar 2 about CODESYS 4. Webinar 2 picks up where we left off. But instead of slides, I will show you everything live. We will edit an ST library in CODESYS 4, compile it via CLI in an integrated pipeline in GitLab, and get the compiled library that is usable in CODESYS 4 and CODESYS 3, step by step. If today's CI/CD discussion felt abstract, Webinar 2 will make it concrete. If you want to try CODESYS 4 yourself, sign up for our Early Adopter program. Early adopters get access to additional informations and a direct line to influence our priorities. Thank you for your time today.